Now we're gonna mix things up a bit and work at the easel in exploring acrylics. So in this lesson, you're going to learn basic techniques such as layering, scumbling, as they pertain to acrylics. There are some differences and we'll explain that to you. We'll also be looking for optical color mixtures and how to work with the acrylics so you can achieve optimal paint consistency. So let's just talk about acrylics in general and their characteristics. So what really differs acrylics from the other mediums, the other water-based mediums we've been talking about, is the binder. So the binder in acrylics is a polymer, and a polymer is a plastic. And the great thing about this polymer is as the acrylic dries, it's going to seal. And what that means for us is that we can layer over a color and it's not going to mix up the previous layer. It also means that the light is going to react differently off of the surface. So whereas in a gouache you have that flat light, in the acrylic you're going to have more of a shine to it. Okay, it does dry a little bit darker than you think it will, and what we're looking for still is most of the time an opaque coverage. Now it can be diluted. We will work washi to begin with, but the clue here is that we're not going to dilute it solely with water. We're going to use something which is a GAC, or GAC, I know it's funny to say. It is another polymer additive. If you add too much water to the acrylics, you're sort of losing their ability to adhere and to seal. So you don't have to be scientifically mathematical about it, but really you don't want to go more than half dilute with water, and you don't want to just work with water. Make sure you have some of this wonderful GAC, okay? And as the paint dries, you have a sealed, protected surface, and you don't have to put it under glass, which people really like. All right, so let's talk about supports. You can work on a board, but I like to work acrylic on canvas. So we are going to work on canvas today. These are store-bought canvases. They're already stretched, which is wonderful. But I always recommend to my students that they gesso the canvas actually 2 times. When you buy the canvas from the store, it will be gessoed. I don't like the rough surface of the canvas, so I gesso it 2 more times. And let's talk about the paint, of course, a little bit more. Again, I only have 6 colors plus white. I've got a warm and cool of each primary plus the white. And as in other mediums, my suggestion would be to buy the best quality that you can. There are student grade acrylic paints, and what you're missing in the student grade of paint, which you're not paying for, is pigment. And pigment is going to give you the color, pigment is going to give you the coverage. So again, if you can, you want to buy the best level that you can, but remember it's only 7 tubes. So that's where you make up for it. All right, let's talk about our easel setup here. We want to keep it ergonomic. You are standing. Some things to think about. The easel height that I'm painting at, I don't want to be painting down or up. I'm about nice reach arm level. You'll notice I'm not standing right on top. I want to get a little bit of gesture, and that is the huge benefit to standing, is that my stroke is going to be looser and more gestural. You'll notice I still am not using that wooden palette with the whole thumb hole through it. My palette is on the table, flat, lots of mixing surface. I've actually got the paint in a stay wet palette in that I can lay my paints out, paint, mist, cover, and be ready for the next day. What I don't want to do though is leave my mixing area dirty. If I do that, the acrylic plastic and the palette plastic will fuse nicely together, and I will have a heck of a time trying to get that paint off. So I do wipe out the middle of my palette at the end. The paint is all squeezed out and ready to go. However, you will see that as I paint, I'm always, again, fussing with a little bit of water. It's a little stiff to paint with right out of the tube. Okay, so as you look at my canvases, you'll see that one is violet and one has a beautiful alizarin crimson ground. So we have a gessoed canvas on top of which we put a ground. The reason I do this is so that when I'm painting, I don't have to concentrate on getting rid of the white canvas. It's already gone. Because I love colors so much, if I have a ground, I'm already reacting to the color. You'll notice one is cool, one is warm. If I have subject matter that is mostly warm, I want to paint it over a cool ground. If I have subject matter that is mostly cool, maybe like a landscape, I want to use it over a warm ground. To lay the ground, I'm going to mix up a more watery kind of paint so that the coverage is not opaque. You'll see that it is a little bit more transparent. I'm going to brush it on in one direction. It doesn't have to be perfectly even, and remember, you don't want a real thick coverage. You just want a nice, it's almost like a glaze over your white canvas. I'm going to use a bigger brush for this. The fewer the brush strokes, the better. And again, it's my softer synthetic brushes, so they don't leave a lot of stroke marks. So my ground is dry, and now I'm going to show you some brush work as we create some swatches, and then you can see me do some overpainting after the swatches are dry. You'll notice that I'm waiting for the paint to dry before I put the next layer on. This will avoid unintended surprises of colors mixing or dragging or getting muddy where you didn't want them to. So over the violet or cool canvas, I'm going to mix up some warmer swatches. I'm going to do one that's darker and one that's lighter. So you'll notice I've dipped in water and in the GAC for my consistency. And the trick, again, is to use enough paint so you can get it to flow. You don't want it to be too thin because I do want an opaque coverage. So let's see what we have here. Nice. The good news about acrylic is that if it is streaky, I can go back in and correct it by doing another layer. But I think that we're good. I think we've got enough paint going on here. So I chose a nice big flat brush. And all I'm going to do now for my second swatch is mix some more white into it so I can show you some contrasting overpainting. And here we go with some lighter colors. It's really important to mix thoroughly again on the palette. Get rid of the surprises that lurk at the top of your brush so you don't get a streaky color when you meant to have a flat one. There we go. I could actually get some more paint happening here. Okay, and so while we're letting that dry, I'm going to rinse my brush out and go over to the warm canvas. And to get some contrasting swatches, I am going to mix some cool colors. Let's do a warm blue. That is the cyan blue. That's over here. And again, I'm using the GAC. I'm using some water. I'm going to mix a little white in. As with some of your other mediums, a little bit of white does help aid in the opacity. And just make sure we have enough paint here. So there's nothing worse than thinking you've got enough paint for a swatch and then having to remix a color because you didn't. So don't be stingy with your paint. Okay, got all the surprises off my brush. And look how that warm, cool contrast pops. Boy, that's nice. And that went on pretty easily. Okay, and now we're going to do a lighter swatch as well. So we're changing the value. paint, water, GAC. There we go. Let's see how that looks. So remember, we have 3 ways of creating contrast: warm and cool, and value changes, and complementary. What we have here are warm and cool contrasts. All right, so I've got my swatches painted out and I'm going to let them dry. Remember that you want to work wet into dry. This way you have more control over your colors. You won't get mud and you won't get streaks. All right, let's mix some paint and do some line work on top of the swatches. I'm going to use 2 different brushes. I'm going to use one of my brights and one of my rounds. So the rounds will make that sort of finer lines and the flat will do some flat work. Okay, so remember we're going for contrast. So first I'm going to mix a green to go over the pink. So I've got my primary blue and my cool yellow, which makes a lovely green. And I'm going to put a little bit of white in that as well. It will help aid in the opacity. Remember, you want to use enough paint. It's got to flow off the brush. So the great thing about standing, as I mentioned, is gesture. So notice that I'm not holding my brush here and leaning in close and working this way, but I'm actually standing back and holding the brush back so that I can move my whole arm and get that line going. I kind of feel like I didn't mix up enough paint, so I'm going to hit that again. Going to mix up some more paint. We can go over things with the acrylic. It will not bring up the previous layer, so it's a big benefit to the acrylic is that it seals itself. So let's see if we can't make that line a little bit better with a little bit more paint. And there we go. Yep. Yep, that's working better. Okay, let's move into a fatter brush. So this is my flat, and keep mixing up more paint. I'd say it's better to mix more than less. That way you can control it and get your intended results. So we're mixing, we're putting the GAC in. I've changed the color up a bit. I rather like that color. Let's use it. Okay. So we can do some flat work and get some contrast going there. Nice. Over the red swatch, I'm going to go a little bit cooler. So clean up with your brushes is really easy in between. I'm going to grab a paper towel. You always want to be controlling the water on your brush. You're going to need to wipe it as it comes out of the bucket so you have no surprises. Okay, and that's really enough to clean them for the next color. That's all I need. All right, so we're going to do some cool work over the red. So I think this time I'll go to my cool blue. That's your ultramarine. Always be mindful of mixing in your GAC. Maybe I'll take a little of that green too. So we'll go a bit blue-green here. And you need to have the patience to really do the mixing well on your palette. You'll also notice that I cleaned the palette in between. I like to have enough clean room on my palette to really mix and see what I'm doing. All right, let's do some line work over here. I think this should flow pretty well. Oh yeah, that's nice. And let's try some flat work on that as well. And again, mixing to get rid of the surprises. And you can see that as the paint dries, it will get a little bit darker and you'll be able to judge if it's at the opacity that you want. If it's not, you can go over it and reinforce or kind of juice up that color, and look how perfectly opaque that is. Okay, so let's move on. Again, wiping the brush down. So I've got that paper towel in my hand. I'm always wiping and managing the colors. We're going to go for a warm-ish color over the blue. Let's mix up a violet. So remember that violet is going to be your cool blue, and your cool red, which is your, in acrylic, a quinacridone. So the names will sometimes change as you move from media to media. Here we have a quinacridone. That's like your alizarin crimson. Let's get some white happening in here because that blue swatch is a little bit dark. And I'm rolling the brushes again, getting those surprises off. Also, I don't want to mix my paint with a huge brush, even if I'm going to cover a large area, because you don't want all of your paint, as you're trying to mix it, to be eaten up by your brush. You know what? I think we could do a lighter value. You can hardly see that over the blue. So I will wait for that to dry and mix a lighter color and go over it. But now I'm going to turn to my lighter blue swatch over which I would want a darker color actually. So let's do something in the warm tones. Let's do a primary red. That is your cad red. And again, these colors are colors from your color wheel. This is actual primary red, the closest on your color wheel. Let's do some hatching. You know, you're always fussing with the amount of water, the amount of paint, and that's okay. That way you know what you've got. So you see it isn't straight out of the tube. Ooh, nice. That covered better, right? And then let's try a little bit of the flat brush work with that. And you'll be able to see when I move on to painting our lemon where I might want a flat brush and where I might want a round brush. And it's nice to remember that it isn't just going to be one brush for the entire painting. It's not just about getting paint on the canvas, it's how you put the paint on the canvas. We were going to go back to our violet. Let's do that. Another thing you might want to do is mist the paint on your palette so it doesn't dry. I can also mist the blobs of paint in my palette. Again, it's water-based. It's going to start drying as soon as you squeeze it out. Okay, so we said that that violet was too dark. We couldn't see it over the blue, so we're going to change the value. We're going to give it a lighter value by mixing more white into it. And I think we'll get a better effect. Let's see how that does. Oh yeah, that is nice. That's almost like a white, but you can still see the violet happening in there. And let's try some flat brush work with that as well. And yep, we're good. And again, as this dries, if I don't have the opacity that I want, I can go right over it. So let's go ahead and set up your station. Remember, there are certain things that are going to make the painting process much easier for you. For instance, if you're right-handed, let's put your palette on the right-hand side. And if you're left-handed, let's put it on the left. We've already talked about getting the easel at the right height, putting your palette flat, and having all of your materials, your water, your GAC, within easy reach. All right.